By the time Nikolai Vasin reached the boulevard, the rain had made a second Moscow underneath the first. The first was the usual one: wet tram lines, a smell of coal and turned earth, women hauling string bags past the kiosks. The second lived in the water. It hung in the black puddles by the curb and slid down the windows of the trams, and when a tram went by, ringing, the second city shivered apart and put itself back together behind it. He kept his eyes on the first one. The second had a way of looking back. He was a practical man, or he had spent some years pretending to be, which is nearly the same thing in Moscow. He worked at a small literary office that published essays nobody finished and novels nobody would admit to. His job was to fix other men's sentences and send most of them back, and to take out of a manuscript whatever lunacy had made the author sit down and write it in the first place. That evening, the lunacy was waiting for him first. It sat on his desk in a brown folder tied with black thread. No name, no address, nothing from the girl at the front desk. Under the thread, someone had slid a single sheet of heavy paper, and the paper was dry, which it had no business being. One line in a thin, upright hand. He came to Moscow on a Thursday, though no train brought him. Nikolai read it twice and looked at the wall. The calendar said Thursday. He took off his coat and hung it on the chair. Water ran off the hem onto the boards. The office was empty. Everyone had gone, or said they had. People in Moscow said a great many things. On the secretary's desk lay a notice reminding staff that paper was to be conserved, ink justified in writing, and enthusiasm cleared with the director before use. Nikolai read the notice every week and respected it less each time. He sat down. The folder smelled of cold tobacco and wet stone. It put him in mind of railway platforms after midnight, of certain stairwells, of churches that men still walked into out of habit after they had stopped believing anything at all. He pulled the thread loose. The manuscript inside had no title, only page numbers, and at the head of the first page, in the same narrow hand, the same sentence: he came to Moscow on a Thursday, though no train brought him. He frowned. A line repeated on the first page was usually the mark of an amateur. He reached for his pencil. Before the pencil touched the paper, something knocked on the window. His office was on the 4th floor. For a while, he didn't move. The rain went on against the glass. A pipe somewhere in the building knocked once and stopped. He turned his head. Across the courtyard, in an unlit window of the building opposite, a man stood in a black coat. Too far to see properly, only the shape of him, tall, bareheaded, the rain coming down on him and nobody minding. His window was open. He raised one gloved hand and tapped the glass from his side, as if answering something, and then he smiled, and Nikolai felt the smile more than saw it. He looked back down at the page. There was a new line on it. Across the courtyard, the editor saw him and decided he was not afraid. He shut the folder. He didn't run. Running was for students and thieves and men who had already grasped their situation, and he had grasped nothing yet. He got up, went to the window, looked again. The opposite window was shut. No man. Only himself given back to him in the wet glass. Flat hair, undone collar, the pencil still in his hand like a tool from a trade nobody practiced anymore. He leaned in. The reflection leaned with him. For half a second he had the idea that the other face had smiled an instant before he did. Then a telephone started ringing out in the hall, and he stepped back. The sound came from the front desk. He waited for it to give up. It didn't. It rang with no hurry at all, the way a thing rings when it knows the building is empty and the evening is long. He went out. The desk lamp was off, the typewriter under its cover. The telephone trembled a little with each ring. He picked it up. A woman said, "Don't correct the first sentence." "Who is this?" "Nobody. I'm calling from the theater." "What theater?" The line crackled. Underneath the crackle, he heard rain, and then applause, and then the low noise of a full room. "The one with your name on the bill," she said. "You should come before they start without you." The line died. He stood with the dead receiver until the tone thinned to an insect whine, then hung up. He could go home. It was the first sensible thought of the night, and the weakest. His flat was 2 stops on the metro, a kettle, a lamp, a bed, books he hadn't opened, a neighbor who sang romances badly when he drank, a flat full of small, dull annoyances, which are most of what keeps a man safe. But there was a theater bill folded on the front desk, and he was fairly sure it hadn't been there a minute ago. He opened it. Red paper, the red of old velvet, black lettering. A midnight performance at the Arcadi, a private house that had once done political comedies and was now known mostly for the holes in its roof. Under the title, a short cast. Author, Nikolai Vossen. The Visitor, to be announced. He read it more than once. The title was set in a hand so curled it might have been written by the rain on his sleeve. The Gentleman Who Came to Moscow. He folded it into his inside pocket, went back, took the brown folder under his arm, and on the way out looked at the calendar again. Thursday. Somebody had drawn a small black ring around the date. The Arcadi stood on a side street off the boulevard, half hidden behind chestnut trees and a row of kiosks shuttered for the night. He'd walked past it 100 times and never gone in. It had the look of a building embarrassed to still be standing, columns whitewashed once too often, steps split, and over the door a stone mask that had lost half a cheek to the weather, so that its smile came out crooked and somehow well-informed. No crowd, only a doorman under the awning in an old army greatcoat, smoking with his eyes mostly shut. Nikolai showed in the red bill. The doorman didn't look at it. "Late," he said. "For what?" "For whatever's still in there waiting. How should I know? I open the door, I don't read the program." "Is there a show tonight?" "There's always a show." He spat to one side. "Sometimes the people in the seats know it. Tonight, who can say? Last Tuesday we had a comedy with no actors. The paperwork came out instead. Got 3 curtain calls and a complaint from the actors' union." Inside, the lobby smelled of wet wool and floor wax, and under that, oranges, which was wrong because nobody sold oranges here. Nobody sat at the ticket window either. The cloakroom stood open with no one behind it, just rows of brass hooks and little numbered tags. A handwritten sign said, "Lost articles returned to their rightful owners, if the owners can be identified to the satisfaction of the articles." He took his coat half off, then put it back on. A theater with no staff hadn't earned the right to hold his coat. From beyond the double doors, a piano was playing a slow waltz. He knew the tune the way every Russian knows it, without being able to say where he first heard it, a thing that turns up at weddings and in canteens and at funerals. In the Arcadi, it came through the doors with a limp, as if it too had walked there in the rain. He pushed the doors open. The hall was not empty. 30-odd people sat scattered in the red seats with their backs to him, most still in their coats. A woman 3 rows down had a hat with a blue feather and the posture of a woman guarding her galoshes.
Two old men near the aisle whispered together like conspirators who'd misplaced the conspiracy. A boy of about 12 slept against his mother's arm. The curtain was up. No set, a table, a chair, a standing lamp, and a black umbrella open upside down in the middle of the stage, catching water that fell from somewhere above. The piano stopped. A woman came out of the wings in a gray dress. He knew her voice before her face. The telephone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "thank you for waiting. Our author's here." Every head turned to him. He stayed by the doors. She smiled, the practiced kind. "Come down, Nikolai Andreevich. We can't very well start with you hiding by the exits. I never wrote anything for this theater." His voice went further than he meant it to. It crossed the whole room and reached the stage without his help. "Nobody said you wrote it," she said, "only that your name's on it." A small laugh moved along the rows, polite, thin, the timing a half beat off from anything human. He went down the aisle because standing still had stopped being possible. The audience watched him come. Shame made him notice things he didn't want to: a wet glove in a woman's lap, a torn nail on an old man's hand, mud drying on a clerk's shoes, a medal pinned upside down on the chest of a heavy man near the front. The gray-dressed woman nodded at the chair on stage. "I won't sit there," he said. "No, that chair's for the visitor." At the word, the door at the back of the hall opened. Nobody turned this time. The man in the black coat came in without hurrying. He was older than Nikolai had pictured, and younger than he had any right to be. Dark hair with a thin streak of silver over one temple. A face that arranged itself well, almost handsome. Though afterwards, Nikolai could never hold a single feature of it in his head for more than a moment. No umbrella. The rain hadn't reached him. The doorman came a few steps behind and pulled the doors to. The gentleman looked at the stage, then at Nikolai. "Forgive me, I've walked in on an argument." He said it in very clean Russian. One of the better ways to come into a room. The audience laughed, warmer now, glad of a man who understood the evening. Nikolai didn't. He drew his gloves off a finger at a time and put them in his pocket. "You'll be the author." "I'm an editor." "Worse. An author sends once. An editor goes back and does it again, in pencil." More laughter. The gray woman stepped aside. The visitor climbed up, sat, crossed one leg over the other, and looked out at the hall like a man at home in his own front room. "Now then, who has the manuscript?" Nikolai held the folder against his ribs. "Ah, there. May I?" "No." "Good. Now the evening has an edge to it." The lamp guttered. A drop fell into the upturned umbrella with a small, exact sound. The woman turned to the hall. "The first act will be read by the author." "It won't," Nikolai said. "Then by the editor." "It won't." "Then by the accused," said the gentleman, and put out his hand. Nikolai had the folder open before he understood he meant to open it. The pages were warm. He looked down. The first page had changed again. Now there was a title.
The Gentleman Who Came to Moscow, and under it a stage direction. The editor refuses to read until he learns that silence has also been given a part. He shut it. The gentleman leaned back. You think keeping quiet helps. It doesn't. Not here. He glanced at the folder. Silence already has a part in this one. What do you want from me? From you? Next to nothing. He thought about it. From Moscow, a few corrections, small ones. A lie out of place here, a debt unpaid there, a life or two left out of the official account. Nothing heavy. There is an office for that, Nikolai said. There are offices for everything, he said. That is why nothing gets done. The woman in the blue feather put up her hand. Will there be an interval? He looked at her. Madam, there's been an interval for years. That's rather the trouble. The boy in the third row woke and started to cry with his eyes shut. His mother whispered to him. The gentleman looked at the child, and something in his face went serious. The crying stopped. The boy sat up, calm, and stared at the open umbrella on the stage. Under Nikolai's hand, the folder gave a single pulse, like a thing with a heartbeat. He stepped back. The gray woman came to him, low. You ought to read. It goes easier when it's read willing. Easier for who? For the ones listening, not always for the one reading. He opened the folder again. His cuff was still damp from the street. This time the words held still, black and narrow, and he read. He came to Moscow on a Thursday, though no train brought him. At the station, a porter swore he'd carried the luggage. 1 empty trunk, 2 sealed envelopes, and a hat box with rain inside it. The audience listened. As he read, the stage changed without anything moving on it. The table was a station bench now, the lamp a post with a timetable behind cracked glass, and the umbrella still stood where it was, catching water from a ceiling that had turned into the evening sky. The porter swore, too, that the gentleman tipped him a coin no bank would take. 3 bankers knew it on sight. One of them fainted. A man at the back coughed hard. Nikolai looked up. He was on his feet, going through his pockets. Heavy, red in the face, a gold watch chain across the waistcoat. A coin came out of his sleeve, dropped into the aisle, and spun a long time on its edge before it lay flat. Nobody touched it. The visitor watched it settle. There. 1 correction. The heavy man made a noise like a kettle on its way to the boil. He reached for the coin and changed his mind. The color had gone out of him. I never took it, he said, low. Of course not, he said. Nobody ever takes anything. Things simply get fond of certain pockets. A mutter went round. Nikolai turned the page because the page wanted turning. That same night, a critic who'd praised books he had never opened found every one of his reviews printed on the inside of his eyelids. One of the old men by the aisle clapped both hands over his eyes. A poet who had spent his life denouncing metaphor dreamed he had become one. A young woman in front laughed once and pressed her fingers to her mouth. A clerk who had lost 3 documents in one man's life found a 4th document waiting at the bottom of his soup. Somewhere past the walls, a tray of dishes went over. The gentleman lifted a hand. Enough for the first act. We mustn't overfeed it. The lamp steadied. The stage was only a stage again. Nikolai closed the folder. His mouth had gone dry. "This is a trick," he said. "Sometimes a trick's the only coat the truth's allowed out in," said the gentleman. "Don't hold it against it." The woman announced an interval. The room got up at once, talking low, shoes hushing on the worn carpet. Somewhere under the seats, water tapped into a hidden pan in time with the rain outside. The woman with the blue feather was demanding her galoshes back from a young man who had plainly never owned a pair. Some of them looked pleased. Others moved the way people move, leaving a sick room. The heavy man stayed in his seat. The old critic still had his hands over his eyes. He came down off the stage, meaning to leave, but the lobby had grown. The ceiling went up into the dark now, and the rows of cloakroom hooks ran off both ways, further than the building could hold. There were coats on them that hadn't come in with the audience. A greatcoat with the collar gone, a child's school tunic, a priest's cassock, a woman's white summer dress, a workman's jacket stiff with old plaster. They hung there full and quiet, as if the people were only in the next room. At the refreshment table, there was tea in glasses, black bread, lemon, and a silver bowl heaped with theater tickets, each one with a name on it. He found his own near the top. Seat, none. Roll, pending. Exit, to be decided. Complaints, accepted yesterday. He put it back. "Bad habit," said the visitor beside him now. "Putting back what's yours. It muddles the books." "Who are you?" "Tonight, a visitor." "And other nights?" "Depends on the city. Some want a doctor. Some want a taxman. Moscow's always had a weakness for guests." "Are you the devil?" The gentleman looked, if anything, let down. "When a man asks me that, he's usually asking whether he can put the blame somewhere else for something he's already done. Let's leave theology out of it. Then what are you?" "A reader." "Of what?" He glanced round the lobby. Drafts, confessions, minutes of meetings nobody listened to, diaries burned a day too late, letters never sent, and letters sent with great pleasure. Moscow's a generous library. A bell rang somewhere, though nobody was holding one. The audience started back in. Nikolai stayed put. "I'm leaving," he said. "Yes," he said. "People do. It's one of the nicer things they believe." He went to the front doors and pushed them open. The street outside was not the one he'd come in by. The same city, but older. The lamps lower, the road shining. A tram stopped dead in the middle of it, with the conductor asleep at the back, and no one driving. Where the chemists should have been, there was a bookshop now, candles in the window, and a sign over the door, "Last Editions." He stepped back inside and let the doors swing shut. The gentleman hadn't followed. He was at the refreshment table, peeling an orange with a little knife. Wrong door. Where's that street? Here. More or less here. I want my Moscow. A patriotic wish, he said, and held out a segment of orange. Nikolai shook his head. He ate it himself. Wise. There are fruits whole careers never came back from. A second bell. Not from the hall this time. From inside the folder under his arm. He opened it. A new page. Act 2. The editor goes to the archive. "No," he said. "A useful word," he said. "Rarely a final one." The lobby lights went down, and when they came up, he was standing in the city archive. He knew the place. He'd come here in what felt like another life, back when he still thought literary facts could be checked by patient women in cardigans. A government building that smelled of dust and glue and old steam pipes. A reading room with green shaded lamps, long tables, portraits of men who looked severe because no one had ever asked them to look anything else. The clock said 1:30 in the morning, and the room was open. At the far desk, the gray-dressed woman sat stamping papers. "You work here as well?" "Only during performances." "And what performance is this?" "The one you brought in with you." "I didn't bring anything." She looked at the folder. He looked down. The brown paper had gone dark and damp, though the pages inside stayed dry. "What am I meant to find?" She pointed to a row of cabinets. "Corrections." He went, because the other choice was to stand by her and ask more questions that had already started to shame him. The first drawer slid open on its own. Index cards, alphabetical, not by name, by sin. Absence, appetite, betrayal, cowardice, false witness, literary envy, mercy, misplaced, optimism, official, lunches extended in the name of culture. He shut the drawer. The second one stuck, then slid open.
one card in it. Vasin, Nikolai Andreevich. He stood without picking it up. From somewhere back in the stacks, the gentleman's voice. "Read it. The archive's public after midnight." He took the card. A brown tea ring stained one corner. It wasn't long. Dates, names, small things he hadn't thought worth keeping in his head. A poem he'd made fun of to the poet's face. A manuscript he'd turned down unread because the paper smelled of onions. A letter from his mother, 3 weeks unanswered. A sentence cut from a dead man's memoir because it made a living official uncomfortable. At the bottom, a line in red ink. He has mistaken his taste for judgment and his tiredness for mercy. What he felt first was anger. Anger comes quicker than shame and often stands in for it. "This is nonsense," he said. The gentleman came out from between 2 shelves with a stack of files. "Most accurate things are." "I never hurt anyone." "That's a large thing to claim. Shall I have it stamped?" The woman lifted her stamp. He said nothing. He set the files down. "Don't worry. You're not being condemned. Condemning is dull work, and I've only got tonight. You're being asked to notice." "Why me?" "Because you noticed the first sentence. Most men would have corrected it." "I nearly did." "Yes, that's why we can be quick about this." The lights flickered. One of the portraits turned its head a little to listen. He sat. The folder opened in front of him. The pages lifted and set themselves down again, though no air moved. "Read," said the gentleman, and this time he didn't refuse. He read about a theater director who had taken every honest line out of a play until the actors could perform it with no risk and no memory. About a censor who had banned a story about hunger from behind a desk while he ate a sugared bun and brushed the sugar from the decree before signing it. About a landlord who'd put a widow out on the street and then, in 3 separate petitions, described himself as a family man. With each paragraph, a file opened somewhere in the room, and with each file, a small noise came in from the city, a lock turning, a glass going over, a dog barking up an empty stairwell, a man surfacing out of sleep to say the name of someone he'd wronged 30 years back. Moscow turned over in its sleep, quietly, the way a city does, nothing a newspaper would notice. Cities don't confess in headlines. They shift an inch and settle. Then he reached a page with no accusation on it, only a description. A man in a black coat walks through Moscow with no umbrella. The rain keeps off his shoulders. In his pocket is a list of names, and the list changes every time somebody, anywhere, tells the truth. He looked up. Something had gone out of the gentleman's face. For the first time, he looked tired. "Does it hurt?" Nikolai asked. "What?" "Reading all of it." "You ask better questions when you're frightened." A faint smile. "No, pains for the living. I have other nuisances." "Such as?" "Accuracy." The word sat between them. The woman had stopped stamping. Back in the stacks, a drawer slid shut. "Come," said the gentleman. "The city's not done." The next place was a tram. Rain ran down the windows in straight lines. The steps shone under a street lamp, and the old car smelled of wet iron and cold electricity. It stood at a stop with no sign. The 3 of them sat at the back, Nikolai, the gentleman, the gray-dressed woman. The conductor slept with a ticket punch in his hand. No one sat up front. The tram started anyway. Moscow went past in pieces, a bakery with no bread and a great many opinions, a police box with a cat asleep in it, a black church dome against low cloud. windows lit one above another like lines of print in a language running out of patience with its readers.
He watched the city go by with something like pleasure. "You like it here," Nikolai said. "Very much." "Why?" "Because Moscow lies beautifully. Some cities lie out of fear, some out of greed. Moscow lies out of imagination. It builds the lie a palace, gives it a ministry, hires it musicians, prints it tickets. You have to admire the workmanship." "And you put it right?" "No. I remind it the lie is mortal too." The gray woman watched the rain on the glass. "He's sentimental tonight," she said. "I am never sentimental." "You left the theater standing." "The roof leaks. That's not generosity." "You stopped the boy crying." He didn't answer. The tram came onto a boulevard he knew, except the buildings had moved. His office stood where a cinema should have been. The cinema stood where a church had been. The church, maybe put out about it, had gone down into a puddle and waited there with its bells shut. He pressed his hands together. "Am I asleep?" "Partly. Most people are. The question's whether you wake up with anything worth keeping." The conductor opened one eye. "Tickets." The woman handed him 3 slips. He punched 2 of them once, and Nikolai's twice. "Why twice?" Nikolai asked. "For doubt," said the conductor, closing his eye again. "It never rides free." Nikolai glanced at his destination, the last page. He folded it small and put it away. "I don't want to go there." "Nobody does," said the gentleman. "That's what books are for. Practice." The tram stopped. They got out in front of a building he knew at once, his own block of flats. The hallway smelled of wet concrete and cabbage and currant. The bulb over the post boxes had been dead for months. Tonight it burned steady. Someone had polished the brass number plates. Even the cracked mirror by the stairs looked cleaner, though it gave him back a version of himself that seemed older by a few decisions. "Why here?" he asked. The man in the black coat nodded at the stairs. "There's a letter you didn't answer." He knew then. His mother lived in a town east of the city. She wrote to him on lined paper, though he told her more than once that the post couldn't be trusted and that the telephone existed for a reason. Her last letter had come 3 weeks ago. He'd read the first line and put it under a book because he'd been tired. He hadn't read the rest. "This is private," he said. The visitor didn't argue. He nodded at the letter on the table. "Then it's been private for 3 weeks. I won't have you use her." The gentleman's face hardened, not with anger, with something more like disappointment. "Use her? I don't need to use your mother, Nikolai Andreevich. She wrote. You didn't answer." The sentence finishes itself. That landed cleaner than any accusation. He went up the stairs. His flat was exactly as he'd left it, and not at all as he'd left it. The kettle on the stove, the books leaning on their shelf, a shirt over the back of a chair, the window shut. On the table, the letter. He picked it up. The first line was an ordinary one. My dear Kolya, forgive the poor paper. The shop had nothing better. So was the rest. That was what made it hard. She wrote about a neighbor's funeral, about a pain in her wrist, about the price of apples, about a dream she'd had where he came home and didn't take his coat off. She asked if he was eating properly. She'd pressed a leaf in with the letter from the tree outside his old window, because the autumn there had been beautiful for 2 days. At the end, I know you're busy. I only wanted to hear your voice before the winter sets in. He sat down. The room was quiet. Behind him, the gentleman and the gray woman waited by the door and came no further in. Even they kept off some thresholds. He folded the letter back along its old creases. This has nothing to do with Moscow, he said, but the conviction had gone out of his voice. Everything private ends up part of the city, said the gentleman. A son who doesn't answer his mother, that's one dark window among thousands. But from the street, at night, the dark windows make a pattern. What do you want me to do? That's not my department. Then why show me? Because you asked what I wanted. People are always disappointed when the answer turns out to be attention. He looked at the telephone on the little table by the wall. It was late, too late for a decent call. But the other option was later, and later had started to look like a coward's word. He picked up the receiver and dialed. It rang once, twice. On the third, his mother answered, half asleep and frightened. Kolya? He shut his eyes. Yes, Mama, it's me. I'm sorry. I read your letter. A silence, but a real one now. A real telephone line. A real room. A real woman sitting up in bed with the receiver against her ear. At this hour? Yes, at this hour. Are you ill? No. Have you been drinking? No. Then something's happened. He looked at the door. The gentleman watched him, calm. Yes, Nikolai said, but not the worst thing. His mother breathed into the phone. That's how you always start when it's the worst thing. And then, for the first time that night, he laughed. A short, rough sound he hadn't planned on. They talked 7 minutes, about nothing. Apples, the wrist, the neighbor, the weather, the tree outside the old window. Her voice steadied as she went. When he hung up, the flat was exactly as before. The cold kettle, the leaning books. The the shirt over the chair. He just felt a little less absent from it. The gray woman had turned to the window and was looking at nothing. The visitor was looking along the bookshelf. "A lot of books here you haven't read." "That's normal. Normal's no excuse, but we'll allow it tonight." The brown folder was on the table now, though he didn't remember putting it there. Its last pages had come in. He didn't want to open it. He did. The last part was headed, "The Correction of the Author." "I'm not the author," he said. "No, but you might end up answerable for a sentence. It happens." He read it without speaking. The last pages were the theater again. The audience in their wet coats, the upside-down umbrella, the standing lamp, the gentleman in the chair, the editor with the folder. But there was another figure on the stage now, a man whose face hadn't been written in. The page left a blank where the name should go. He turned to the gentleman. "Who's this?" "A vacancy." "For whom?" "For anyone prepared to be final." The walls of the flat went dim, and the theater came back up around them. He was standing on the stage. The audience was in its seats, the gray woman by the curtain. The upside-down umbrella was full of rainwater now, though it hadn't run over. The gentleman sat in the chair with his hands folded on the head of a black cane Nikolai hadn't seen before. "We've reached the part of the evening people get wrong most often," the gentleman said. "They expect punishment. Punishment's a crude editor. Cuts too much, understands too little. The thing that matters is the revision." The audience leaned in. The heavy man with the coin was gone. Where he'd sat, there was an empty coat. The critic's chair held a pair of spectacles and nothing else. The boy slept on, his head in his mother's lap now. "Revise what?" Nikolai asked. "The ending." "Whose?" "Yours, if you insist on it. Mine, if I get careless. Moscow's, if the city volunteers. But cities rarely volunteer before morning." The gray woman brought him a pen, an old fountain pen, cracked black body, gold nib. He didn't take it. "What happens if I write?" "Something gets less false." "And if I don't?" "Something stays convenient." That frightened him more than a threat would have. He looked at the blank line in the manuscript. The page waited. The whole theater waited with it. Even the rain held off over the umbrella. He thought of the card in the archive and the letter, and his pencil hanging over the first sentence, ready to make the small correction that would have kept the whole night from happening. He took the pen. The blank line didn't want a confession. It wanted a name. Not the gentleman's. His own. Nikolai Andreevich Vasin. The nib caught once. A small blot bloomed beside the V. The ink dried as he lifted the pen. The audience let out a breath. The gentleman stood. "There," he said, quiet. "A modest start. What have I signed?" "Nothing binding. That kind of thing needs witnesses. You've only written yourself into it. Less dramatic than damnation, and a good deal more trouble. Will I remember this?" He drew his gloves on. "Wrongly. Memory's kind that way." It keeps the wound and loses the knife. Will you come back? To Moscow? Certainly. To you? That depends on the revisions. The gray woman put the lights out one at a time. The audience went with them, the faces first, then the coats, in the rows of seats, until the theater was a dark room with rain in it, a lamp, an umbrella, a folder, and 3 people who might have been actors after the curtain or mourners after a funeral. He wanted to ask one more thing and couldn't pick from all of them. Whether the man was evil, whether he was just, who had written the manuscript, why the city let him in, why he had spared the boy, why he had made him telephone his mother. The man in the black coat heard enough of it in his face. "Don't rush to understand," he said. "Understanding keeps. Notice first, correct after. Sleep if you can." Then the lamp went out. He woke at his desk. Morning had got into the office without much enthusiasm. The rain had stopped. There was a pale light on the floorboards, and somewhere below, the first tram of the day rang its bell. His coat hung on the chair, dry. The typewriter sat under its cover. The calendar said Friday. For a long while he didn't move. On the desk lay the brown folder. It was empty. Beside it, his pencil, sharpened to a fine point, a red theater bill folded once, and a pressed leaf from a tree he hadn't seen since he was a boy. He touched the leaf carefully. The door opened. The secretary came in with 2 glasses of tea and a stack of manuscripts. "You're early," she said. "I was here late." "Again? You'll wreck your health over books nobody buys." She put the manuscripts down, saw the brown folder, and frowned. "Where'd that come from? If it's poetry, I didn't see it. If it's from the ministry, put it under poetry. Same delay." "I don't know. Should I log it?" He looked at the folder. For a moment, he half expected it to move, to breathe, to push out another page. It did none of that. It lay there like paper. "No," he said. "Leave it with me." She shrugged and went to her desk. He opened the first manuscript off the stack, badly typed, the margins all over the place. A rusted paper clip had left a faint orange stain on the top sheet. The opening paragraph had 3 adjectives it didn't need, a metaphor with a limp, and a sentence that lost its way before it found the verb. He reached for his pencil. Then he stopped. Across the courtyard, in the window of the building opposite, a man in a black coat stood watching. No, not a man. A coat on a hook by an open window. The rain had started again, lightly. He looked down at the manuscript. The bad sentence sat there waiting, weak, clumsy, and alive. He didn't correct it. He read the rest of the page instead, then the next one. By midday, Moscow had gone back to being itself. Clerks lied, critics praised, officials lost documents, mothers wrote letters, and sons put off answering them. The city went on under a low sky, good as ever at surviving. But here and there a man stopped before he spoke. Here and there a pencil hung over the paper a moment longer than it used to. At the Arcady, where the rainwater still stood in the upside-down umbrella on the empty stage, the gray-dressed woman swept the floor before the evening show. Under the front row, she found a ticket with no seat number. On it, in narrow black letters, "Roll, to be continued." She put it in the silver bowl and turned off the lamp. Outside, the boulevard shone. The first Moscow went by in a hurry, heads down in the rain. The second one watched it from the puddles, the way it always did. And if a man in a black coat was out there somewhere past the kiosks, walking nowhere in particular with the rain keeping off him, well, by morning the street wouldn't be certain he'd been there at all.